Okay, thank you very much for really staying on task. Thank you. You're going to ring the bell? Just huge thank yous to you for not only engaging in the task, but also for really moving. And it's not easy when you're in a very interesting discussion and you're forced to pull it together to focus on what was really important when you could have continued to discuss longer. But so much appreciation for doing that. It's always a challenge in a group of this size, of course, to hear back what everyone talked about at their tables, and it would be impossible. If we tried to hear from all of you, this is probably the only theme we'd get to in the whole symposium for this day. So what we would like to do is, I just have a wandering mic here, is just to get a few of the most important issues that you talked about. Just a statement on what was an issue that you talked about, and we'll just do it popcorn style. Any table that wants to just contribute an issue that emerged at your table, we'll just go around for 10 minutes. All of these sheets will be collected and they will be typed up by CAL's staff overnight, and you will get all of the issues tomorrow. So you will have a record of everything that will feed into your own country planning, or feed into whatever your next steps are. So you won't lose anything, but we can't take it all up in an oral take-up. So, and then in the last 10 minutes, we will move to hearing what a rapporteur has absorbed from walking around and listening to the discussion. So who would like to give us? Mark. I'm just going to bring a mic to you. And we'll keep your comments at each table. One issue that you feel is... Okay, great.
This on. Okay, from table 9. The first question was, whose responsibility is it? If we look at the different partners in this whole issue of career development, and then from that we get to this second one, how should career practitioners facilitate the partnerships in getting all the role players together and work on the different aspects of that?
Okay. So for you, that's the principal issue. Thank you. Another table who'd like to contribute an issue, please.
We felt that there was a very strong need to redefine the term career, and also to look at very simple language in describing career development and workforce development. And coming along with that was that sort of new vision and perspective of what career development will look like in the future and what that will mean for practice.
Thank you. Remo?
We were discussing that the recognition of a prior formal and non-formal learning would be an issue that we should engage guidance more thoroughly within. And it means bothly within the assessment of the existing competencies, but on the other hand, how to promote the portability of the qualifications. But then on the other hand, we were discussing whose role is to provide the research on this, or provide information for the different stakeholders, for example, to promote the acceptance among the employers of these prior skills that might be obtained in other settings.
Chris?
Yeah, we had an interesting discussion, and I'm not sure we actually stayed on the questions that we were asked, but
these Canadians, can't trust them.
But we were looking at issues like the services to the underserved, to the gaps. And then we kind of extended that a bit, and we asked, as our issue, can the career development field embrace both contextual and individual differences and adapt their services accordingly? And related to that, the issue of how do career development specialists then reconceptualize their roles in these new contexts, such as providing services to organizations for career development in organizational settings.
Liz?
She's right there.
Oh, thanks. Is this on?
Yes.
Right. We had a lot of discussion about stakeholders. You know, who are they? Do we actually know who the key ones are, so that we can target our efforts to make the most influence with the fewest number of people? And how to actually engage them in our business. Mm-hmm. And you learned this word, punter, today, and how important it is to take things from a customer perspective, that rather than be thinking about ourselves as different key holders, what is it that our customers may expect of us, and what together might we do, and to remember that their needs and wants may not be what we think they are. And we had some very interesting discussion about different stages of development with the countries round our table, and if that, because it's such a global market now, actually trying to hold on to some of your workers was really difficult, because the opportunities out there were better and people want things now. They don't want to wait till the local economy improves for them.
Me next? Okay. We had a very interesting discussion on our table about the role of government, and we drew on both Wendy's piece about the sort of top 0.5% of employees and also Sue's observations about casualisation of labour. And I guess essentially one of the points we were coming to was around, well, if that's the case, can you change it? And is it the responsibility of government to change it? And if it isn't possible to change it, or if there are doubts about the ability to change it, then the responsibility on government is to actually help people to understand that they need to help themselves, and that they have to, you know, the message "you're on your own" is one that governments are not going to be happy promoting. But actually, there are resources there that can help you because you're on your own, is a message that could be marketable.
It's okay. I was just going to pick up on the stakeholder contributions and involvement, and we certainly would like to highlight, coming back to the terminology, the language issues, and the importance of local level responses and bringing key stakeholders together at the local level, and access to labour market information at that local level, so that all players have a shared understanding and can assist individuals. And on the individual level, the importance and the need to develop attitudes and the flexibility of individuals. You know, knowledge, skills, competencies, yes, but preparing young people from a very early age, and we're talking from 4 years of age, to actually start that journey, so that we're growing future generations that are open to the changes that they'll experience.
John?
Yeah,
Yeah, John, and then.
Okay, sorry. We identified the need for a clear and sophisticated discussion with employers and other actors on how career development and workforce development interact, and not just, and that this should be ahead of the kind of crisis times when employers are really need the assistance of career development in order to address that. And we also felt that the career professionals need to view skills shortages as opportunities rather than crisis, in terms of its, or rather than as opportunities rather than risks to their career development practice. I think they're afraid that they're being pinned down by these employers to produce something, and I think they should look at these as opportunities for dialogue and for longer-term development of skills.
Our group talked quite a bit about the challenges, I guess, for moving the career development professionals from a matching model into a far more of a self-managing careers management model. We agreed that there was a lot of potential in many of the areas that perhaps have been underserved, particularly for people, existing workers, wanting to look at changes to meet work-life balance objectives, people with very stressful or busy lives. That there is a lot of untapped potential there. And I think where our conversation got to, and we certainly didn't sort of conclude, was that there was quite a big challenge to really get a lot more clarity about the roles of the different stakeholders, so government, employers, individuals, education and training institutions, in making this expanded role work. We thought that there was actually quite a lot of work to bring together what appears to be implicit understandings into more of a social contract between some of the stakeholders. Thanks.
I think it was group 4 or something, we talked about how the various stakeholders concerned with career development use the same terms with different definitions, which is a perfect prescription for a communication breakdown. And so we need greater collaboration, greater dialogue, greater agreement in terms of our the terms that we use, and especially as it relates to outcomes and interventions. We also talked about the fact that it seems to be kind of the style today to talk about linking career development with human development, which is a concept which I love personally and have written about and so forth, but the reality is quite different, that we seem to be operating, even in perhaps the best of circumstances, from a model that's frozen in time that doesn't really acknowledge human development processes within the career development experience.
We had a long talk about all kinds of factors, and the ones we settled on were in a world where knowledge is always growing and always perishable, it becomes imperative that people learn how to acquire knowledge, learn how to learn. And our biggest point probably was the need for mutual support of employers, government, education, all the sectors, including career development communities, to support individual lifelong learning as a means to maximize our greatest resource, the human resource. A sense of investment. How do we create a sense of investment in all those communities is the operational side of the question.
Thank you very much. I'd like to turn it now for our last 10 minutes to Tony Watts, who is the role rapporteur, as you probably know, is to rather be a kind of window on what they've heard as they've wandered through your conversations. So Tony, over to you.
Which means it's impossible. Yeah, that's number one. Okay. It's a bit of summary, a bit of observation. 3 things, some key concepts, language, and slippages are the 3 things I'm going to talk about, and I will talk slowly. Thank you, Lynn. Very good. Right. What we've been doing, I think a lot, is trying to get the key concepts for our work right. The big picture of the human capital agenda, which is a very big picture, and then working with workforce development and career development, picking up employability skills and labour supply, which were the key things that we started with. And the interface between career development and workforce development is clearly absolutely core. And immediately, of course, we run into language problems there, because Wendy slips in a thing about, you know, the career development is a broader concept, of course, and what really we're concerned with here, I think, is what she called career support. But language came up again and again in all the groups that I went in, this issue about language. Recognizing that we have a professional language, the career development field has a professional language. There is the language of the clients, the individuals. There is the language of the policymakers. And there's the language of the employers. And they're rather different. And the language, Mary said that the traditional concern of the career development field is the private good. The state is concerned, if you like, preeminently with the public good. And I suppose the employer is concerned with the organizational good. And the language they use to describe that are different. And there is therefore potential for great confusion. And we then get into we need simpler terms, as we have been saying to ourselves this morning. As we converse from our countries, we have to find ways of communicating to one another, to state things more simply as well as more slowly. But without losing what it is we're trying to communicate. And sometimes I think there is a kind of linguistic cringe in this field where we feel we've got to find a new language because our language isn't working. And I think most cultures go through that, but then they realize they must hang on to their language, but they must learn to be perhaps bilingual and trilingual. And maybe that is the point. We have to learn how to converse, to go into other languages, including in particular the language of policymakers and of employers, because they are actually the customers in many, many cases. So we must be able to talk their language. But it's not only language. It is also actually about values and goals, which are rather different. And there is an issue about understanding and recognizing the legitimacy of employers' organizational goals and the legitimacy of policymakers' policy goals, and being able to work within those spaces, giving them that legitimacy, and then finding where we can reconcile what they are wanting with what we can offer in terms of what we offer to individuals. And it's that process then a reconciliation. But there is then another fundamental issue, which is in the end, I mean, we heard Sue talk about Adam Smith, and I did mention in previous events, but I think worth mentioning again. Adam Smith said, his most famous statement was, that individuals led by their own interests, actually, if you actually encourage them to pursue those interests, they meet the public good more effectively than if they are pushed into meeting the public good. That was what Adam Smith said, which is a wonderful opportunity for career development practitioners, because it's precisely the notion, if we can help individuals to do what they want to do more effectively but also better informed, that will meet the public good and also the employer good. And this is perhaps the wisdom of crowds that Sue was talking about. But does the state and do employers genuinely buy that argument? And if they don't, can we persuade them? And if not, what compromises do we need to make? I think that's where a lot of the difficult issues actually lie. A bit about slippages. We slip, I think we start with a strong thing about development, but we slip, as we did, I think, in the first session, towards it's about participation, retention, which are much narrower goals. We slip from a notion that we are universal, no, we must target our services. And yet I heard in one of the groups the point made that in medical services, the move now is to move away from attention to the sick towards the notion that we should be helping everybody to remain more healthy, which is precisely where the developmental bit comes in. But then thirdly, we slip from the lifelong approach into young people, and sometimes the developmental notion tempts us to do that. If only we did our good work with young people, they could then manage their careers. But a genuinely developmental approach must be lifelong. And we must avoid that trap here in particular, because I think what is distinctive about this event is that we have focused on workforce development. And although we are, and of course it varies between different countries, and some countries are still very much concerned with young people, and that has a space within this event. And of course the needs of workers, the contingent workforce who are moving between employers is very important. So reintegration is very important. But it does seem to me that we must not lose the focus about working with employers, because the group that misses, which are touched least, if you like, in terms of genuine career development, in terms of career support, effective career support, is the people actually in the workforce. And that's where we have traditionally been weakest, and where career guidance services find it most difficult to work effectively. And that's the bits that I think is strongly on the agenda here, which is why the employer dimension and all the things that Wendy was saying, for example, are so important. So it does seem to me that we must not allow that slippage to take place. A few reflections. I don't know whether Christine and Richard want to add one point.
Okay, here's just a brief story that I heard from the discussion groups. It might be the case that the labour market works well for most. Crowds might be wise, but they can always be wiser if we want to work more productively and to work smarter. And labour markets might work well for most people, but there are some people for whom they don't work as well as they could. And so, therefore, as a result of that, one of the things that we need to do, one of the things that career development, career guidance services should focus upon is better ways to assess and report on the important competences and skills that people have got to improve what the economists would call skilled labour market signalling systems. And these are the important skills that people have got and the important skills that employers really want. And there are a range of tools that career guidance people have available to them to help to improve these signalling systems. And a range of these were discussed in the groups. And there seemed to be a story that we need to work upon ways of improving signalling systems, assessment and reporting systems that will work not only within particular areas of countries, but across national borders in countries like Australia and Canada, and across
international borders.
I'd just like to add one very brief thing, and that is that whilst I also heard people talking about the need to simplify language, for example, I also heard people actually tackling with the fact that we are dealing with the most complex intersection of a whole range of industry policy, labour market policy, educational policy. And so I think it's, and I also heard people talking about, for example, the situation in terms of responsibility, that who's responsible depends upon the nature of your attachment to the labour market, the point at which you are in your career, a whole range of things. So I think one of the important things for me in listening to the feedback is to actually not fool ourselves into thinking that a simplification of language is actually going to take away the complexity of the issues we're dealing with.
Thank you.